Alright, after multiple delays and 3 years between the end of shooting and now, we finally get to see Jungle Cruise. I was actually starting to wonder if this movie even actually existed or not. But apparently, what it was Disney wanted it to be specifically a summer release, where they thought that would easily be where it was the most successful, so they kind of just kept holding it off until a summer came along that didn't seem like it was gonna. Nothing would interfere with a release of a movie of this kind. And apparently that paid off because this is Thursday night. I went in at 6 o'clock, and the theater was basically full. Like, the only empty seat was the seat directly next to me. I just somehow lucked out with that. um, but there were a shitload of people in there. Then all seem to be having fun with this, which is great because it does have. Obviously, it's based on the ride that I'm not entirely familiar with. I've heard references to, to my understanding, there's like jokes within the movie that are references to it, specifically the backside of water thing. I don't know if like all the puns he was making was like specific callbacks or what, but and then the idea that this being based off a Disney ride, it's gonna, and not just because of that, but also the content itself and the type of movie that it is. There's probably going to be endless comparisons to the Pirates of the Caribbean movies, obviously, which most of them I could take or leave, but obviously this one, I'm going to be drawn to this one much more, obviously mainly because of the almost single-handedly the presence of Blonde. The fact that the fact that she's like really the center of it also, because there was the whole marketing thing where they were kind of joking back and forth, her and Dwayne Johnson, and they were doing the gimmick about which one is actually the star of it, and they had like competing posters where one is in the foreground and one's in the background. And while that is obviously a funny gimmick, it's actually basically what is it basically represents their characters perfectly, and that's pretty much what's going on here. Where it's like it was somewhat reminding me of that whole thing about how Kurt Russell's character in Big Trouble in Little China in any other movie would be a sidekick, and it just so happens that the movie just focuses on him. Um, and it almost kind of they kind of go back and forth between feeling like the sidekick to the other, because obviously a lot of people going into it probably see, Dwayne Johnson, the ultimate action star, where like all of his movies are big in some way or another, um, and he's always the foreground, like it's always just him and like occasionally Kevin Hart or something. Um, but now you've got, and usually if there is a female co-lead, it's usually like a love interest or a damsel in distress or something like that, especially in a movie like this. But you have equal badass Emily Blunt, which is, and pairing the two of them together for this, I don't know that there would have been two other people that were as convincing as far as what they're doing here. And what I kind of especially loved was, and it's probably because I was mainly here, for Blunt. Like, that's the reason I saw this movie on a Thursday night instead of, like, tomorrow or sometime over the weekend. But, the fact that it starts with her and we get to see what she's capable of, because it sets up that it's her and her brother, Jack Whitehall, I think it is. I know he's like really big in the UK. I'm only slightly familiar with him mainly because of his appearances on Graham Norton, but I'm sure I'll get to know him well. But and he's the one that's kind of the goofy sidekick to her hero, and it starts off immediately showing that she's kind of the brains of whatever operation they might be doing. Um, but then in the same breath, practically, she takes out a dude and then gets a whole action scene with Jesse Plemons, all long before the title of the movie is even shown. Like, we get both of their full introductions before we even see the title. So it's definitely kind of an equal hero kind of thing. But I did like starting with her because when you see Dwayne Johnson, you kind of get that idea of he's the action hero, and then if he has a co-lead, it's almost kind of like the story's trying to sneak it up on you that, oh, this person is a match to him. But it's like, because we start with her and she already gets an action scene in her opening scene, It's when we see him like swinging around and doing his thing where we're like, oh, she has a match apparently. Like he's the one that's having to match up to her because we've already been established to her. And I like that they kind of reversed the order on that than the way they would usually do it. And because like I said, as far as like the badass factor goes in that scale, you've I think Edge of Tomorrow kind of solidified her forever as just as much of an action badass as anybody. Like I know it seems like a big statement to say people like The Rock, but I think it's true. But maybe that's just me and the rest of her diehard fan base. I don't know, but that's how I feel about it. So also going into that, um, the whole setup, especially once they're on the boat and it's the rest of the movie, the concept of the movie happening, it does have this very old-fashioned feel to it, and you can tell that's what they were going for. Like, I think in interviews she's mentioned, like, Indiana Jones and Romancing the Stone and stuff like that, and, like, the African Queen were inspirations, and that's clearly what's going on here. But I also think it's interesting that when you look at movies like Romancing the Stone, for instance, another thing she mentioned in an interview was that the director had said that when he signed on, it was obviously it's going to be a huge adventure movie, and it's going to kind of be Disney doing another thing in the style of the Pirates movies and all that. And it's going to be inspired by Indiana Jones and stuff like that. But when the director came on, like, the first thing he said was his approach to it was going to be basically love, like a love story. And that's the thing where, like, when you have big adventure movies or big action movies like this, it's like those movies are those things, and then if there happens to be a love story, it's very shoehorned in, and it just kind of happens. Like, there's not really too much build up to it. It's just like you have a male and female character, and then action happens, and then it just happens like magic or something. So you can see that the whole intention was to kind of do that thing where we're kind of we're planting the seeds to that early in the way the two characters interact, to where that's kind of the ultimate point that we reach. And with it just so happens to be a constant adventure movie also. Like this, that might put some people off if they want like a pure adventure movie, because they might think that that's like the love story would be in the foreground with everything else in the background. That's not the case at all. There's like this perfect balance of that, and especially since in cases like this where the chemistry can be prominent throughout the action scenes, which is kind of boosting that love story in a not as blatant way because you're so focused on the action. But it's like, and yet that's what I was talking about, where lesser movies do that thing where it's like, oh, just because they're involved in an action scene, two characters would just fall in love, in quotes. But the fact that these two specifically are so charismatic, and obviously Blunt in any scenario can just be so expressive. Like, that's one of the things that draws me to her the most. Just like in any, even if she's doing something like kind of mundane, she can just say something in a way, or just have like a facial expression, and the character just feels so animated and kind of alive, regardless of if it's sort of a basic scenario that's going on, or a basic action, what could be considered a basic action scene or something like that. Like there's a point in time where she has to pull a knife out of Dwayne Johnson, and the way she like describes the knife, it's just like everything about her is so animated, when this could have very easily have been a character that was so just kind of one thing, one dimensional. Like the point in time where, after, like I said, in the first scene, it's already established that she's basically going to be an action hero, has the capacity to be an action hero, and that's the direction we're headed. But, like, the second time we see her, when she's kind of introduced after we're moving towards the plot, when she steps off the train and she's, like, smiling, and it's like, this is the kind of shot that introduces somebody that might eventually be, like, a damsel in distress character or something. But seeing that sort of, knowing already what the balance of the characters is here, you can almost see them, like, aggressively going after the tropes and trying to turn them around. And the thing also is, some people might think it's a bit, what's the word I'm looking for? Like, a bit obvious if it's like, the guy that's known for being the big action hero does something, and then he's upstaged by his female co-star, and there's something supposedly comedic about that. But what makes it actually comedic here and not just feel like a trope is, like I said, that balance where it'll be he'll do something that's big and actiony, and then she'll do something that upstages him. But then he'll do something that upstages her back, and then it's just like this endless, almost competition of sorts that never really goes one-sided. So that was something that was really appealing. Kind of felt like they were taking the usual tropes and like almost like really intentional, like almost specifically calling out to the audience, like this is what they were doing. Like the but in like a charming way, not like an overbearing, hey look how clever we are kind of way. Um, but we also have stuff like that where I was actually they actually like got me because I guess I was just thinking of like other movies, which I guess is the point. But I almost thought they'd made a big mistake because once they're getting ready to leave and they're getting on the boat, she's walking up and there's a bunch of dudes in the background with a bunch of luggage, um, but like Princess Vespa and Spaceballs or something. And when he's like, "Oh no, she's bringing all this," because of course she is, and I actually kind of fell for it for a second because I was like, "Oh God, what are they doing? They just completely fucked up what they already set up." But the joke is she has one bag in her hand, and it's her brother that's bringing all the the useless shit. Um, which is, and like I said, so that trope that we're looking for, that's usually the co-lead, has been put on this side character of her brother, which also makes it an equal balance. So he's not as like, because usually that character can be a bit annoying. I know people immediately, if we're going to stick to Indiana Jones, a lot of people look at Cave Capshaw in Temple of Doom, and it's like, oh, please, for the love of God, we don't want that. So the sort of comedy sidekick can be an annoying character, and I could see people maybe seeing him that way. But like I said, I do think there's enough of a balance here, and the fact that all three characters are comedic enough, like comedy might as well be one of the genres, which is something because usually you can say movies like this maybe have too much comedy in them if it's comedy relief. But the fact that you can basically put comedy as maybe one of the genres kind of makes it easier to embrace and makes it more just work in general. Especially with two leads here who are so good with comedy, especially. Like, I love so much when Blunt gets the chance to do comedy. Like, that was basically, to my understanding, like her jumping off point. Like, when you hear her story from the get go, was that the reason a teacher suggested she start acting was because she was so funny. And it's like because she's done so many serious roles at this point, you almost forget that she's like incredible with like comedy's basically, I would say, her calling, but she's just so multifaceted that like just everything is her calling because there's literally like nothing that she can do or can't do. Excuse me, Jesus Christ. There is nothing she can't do at all. And not only that, but even if she's like going into something that she's never really done prior to the movie she's working on, once the movie happens, it'll look like she's been doing it forever. Like I said, maybe the one exception is the accent in Wild Mountain Time. Just to throw the elephant in the room out there. Yes, Wild Mountain Time still exists. It's literally sitting right here. And that was just, that once again, that was just to hold us off through 2020 until we could get to A Quiet Place and this coming out. So yes, she's perfect, but we know that. That's the whole point of this series I've been doing, is to just talk about how flawless her skills are. And this is no different because not only can she do the action really well, but there's also the whole thing where this being a love story, so eventually it's inevitable that there'll be scenes where she's shot to where, like, the way she's shot is basically just to make her look breathtaking, which obviously is effortless. And so the way they do that also, but they balance it out with how she'll be shot in a way that makes her look like really angelic, but then she'll do something badass in an action scene in the very next minute. So I love the way they were able to do that with her character, and it's this is one of the more fun characters she's had. I think for not that all of her characters don't have her appeal, but as far as like in something like this, there's just so, and I really don't know because the big question comes up that I can say that I really like this movie, but the question is would I like it as much if it was another actress? Well, first off, obviously not, but but the case of how it's really what she can bring to it, that most honestly most actresses probably couldn't. Where it really takes that level of charm to really bring you into the story, especially since she's really carrying a lot of it. Like there's a couple of moments where The Rock is practically taken out of commission and she has to do things on her own. Um, and even at those points, it was like, yeah, that's a yes for me. That's what I'm here for. So I mean, I love The Rock, and even if his movies aren't always great, especially lately, he does have an appeal to him also, to where it's like going to his movies doesn't feel like an entire waste of time. It even feels like quite a few of them are the same movie basically. Which this was getting accused of also, about how all of his movies are in the jungle and all that. But there's a lot of things on the side here that can kind of differentiate it a little bit. First and foremost, the villain, one of the villains, there's a lot of villains in this, one of the villains being Jesse Plemons. And this is a Jesse Plemons we haven't quite seen yet, because we've seen a number of different versions of him, where obviously you might think of, Todd on Breaking Bad, or his character Ed on Fargo. And then we realized how great he is with comedy and Game Night. And it's like, so there's a lot of things he can do as well. And then what he's doing here is pretty much something that it perfectly suits this movie. It's like when you see a movie like this, another thing that you really want, another one of the tropes, one of the good tropes, is you just have to have a super hammy, over-the-top villain. And he is really committed to being as over the top and hammy as possible, which is exactly what we want. There is a point in time in this where he talks to a bee with the same conviction as if like fucking De Niro was sitting across from him. Like, it's crazy. So prime De Niro, we'll say, and I love, especially in like villain roles, when actors can just really commit to that and like commit to the silliness of it and really go into it. The other main villain here is Edgar Ramirez, who has an interesting role of being there's like a whole backstory. It's the whole plot. So this is one of those movies where the plot doesn't really matter. It's all about kind of the set pieces and the characters and all that. So I couldn't completely tell you what's going on with Edgar Ramirez. Though I also, in my defense, can't really tell you much of what's going on with Edgar Ramirez, because the auditorium that in this theater, I think it's the only auditorium that's really like this, but it's a problem in this auditorium for like the past 3 years that nobody has ever fixed, where the speakers are clearly off balance, where the dialogue is like over here and kind of much lower, and on this side is like the sound and the score, and it is extremely loud. So whenever it's just dialogue, you can hear everything perfectly. But if it's dialogue and action or dialogue and score, you cannot hear the dialogue for shit. So, so I was catching glimpses of what the plot was, but I wasn't that concerned because it's an adventure movie. And it's like, they need that thing, they need to keep this thing from getting into the hands of Edgar Ramirez or Jesse Plemons or whoever. That's all you really need to know. But the whole backstory of him is after he was frozen in the jungle, like the jungle claimed him or something, and his guys. When they come back, now that the jungle has really claimed them, Edgar Ramirez's entire body is made out like he looks like Edgar Ramirez, but like within the skin, like a really thin layer of skin, his entire body is snakes, which is actually really cool. So when he like gets sliced in the face, snakes like pop out. And there's a dude that's all bees, but he's also honey. So it's like he's got a human face, but then he's a full human form, but he's also just constantly dripping, which is what his body is. And then there's a guy just like that that's also mud. I think there's a couple people like that. I will say the CGI is not perfect, which is a little concerning when they had so many delays to take care of that. They had like multiple years to just kind of work on that. Um, there's still a lot of really cool and creative ideas in it as far as like character designs and stuff like that, which are really fun. Especially in fight sequences when you're fighting like the guy that's made out of honey or the guy that's made out of mud and how that happens. So there's all that. We've also got just a tiny, tiny bit of Paul Giamatti in here. I really wish I remember seeing his name on the poster. I wish we had more of him, but he kind of just bookends it. Like he's the guy that The Rock owes money to, and he like poses as him, even though that doesn't last very long. That whole thing. It needed more Paul Giamatti. It needed to probably use him a little better, but it's whatever. Everybody seems to be having fun here, so run with it, I guess. I guess another problem with the action would be that the editor probably needs to lay off the coke a little bit. I don't know if I just got used to it, but it didn't seem like it was as over edited in the second half as it was the first half. Like it kind of found its footing somewhere as far as how to show off the action scenes, but there's still enough there. Like I said, just the creative ideas behind the set pieces in general works a lot in its favor and gets past any shortcomings they might have. And then we have as far as like the comedy goes, that's another thing I loved also, where I was talking about like how Blunt's able to use like expression or just the way she says her lines or something that are really funny. It was also interesting and new to see her doing like a slapstick kind of thing. Where, like I said, there's kind of a balance of which one of them kind of comes off as the big hero. Because at the end of the day, it's both of them. But when one of them has a really big moment, the other might fail in a way. So when she's doing like this whole zip line thing, that is something a really cool Indiana Jones like action hero would do, and then it just ends up failing miserably. I love seeing her do stuff like that. Like that feels fresh coming from her, and all these, and the way that she's kind of always using her career to kind of go in these directions we haven't really seen her do, I think is another thing that just it keeps her fans like us coming back constantly. And as far as The Rock goes, having his own comedic moments also, where we were talking about like his really bad puns being a thing. The crowd in my theater was really into them, but I think a lot of that is also balanced out with it's. I mean, I guess a couple of them are actually funny, but there's also the beginning when he's just doing them constantly, and if like at some point Blunt just says like can he like stop, like just like he literally has a problem that he just like he has an addiction to puns that he can't stop. But it's the first time we see him doing this, and he has a crowd, and he does like the backside of water thing and stuff like that. And the way this crowd of people on his boat are just disgusted by his puns is very funny. So, um, but yeah. So I don't know if there's much else to really say because it's probably exactly the movie that you think it is going into it. So it's an adventure movie, and it's in the style of something like Romancing the Stone or Indiana Jones. So it's gonna have a nice classic feel. I was also occasionally getting like the Mummy vibes, like Stephen Sommers' Mummy, which I have mixed feelings on, but just being in that vein, it did kind of have this quality to it that felt like it was sort of bringing something back that we hadn't really seen in full in a while in a movie. So, and how that whole adventure genre seems to be like Pirates brought it back in like 2003 before they ran it into the ground. But it does kind of feel like there's something here that might reinvigorate that, for better or worse. Usually, reinvigorating something means somebody else is going to run it into the ground. But in the meantime, I feel like we can enjoy this as sort of a return to something classic that I feel like we haven't seen done well in a while. Despite it is a lot more CGI heavy than a better version probably would have been, a more sort of thrilling version. But like I said, the charm of it in general, and especially the chemistry of Dwayne Johnson and Blunt is gonna keep it here, and obviously, Blunt in general was gonna make this, because obviously any movie that she's in would be significantly worse without her in it, just because, not because it would be bad, but because that's just how much she can elevate something. That's how much she brings single-handedly to a project. So, I yeah, usually I try to stick to the movie, even doing this series, but this was, I guess I'm particularly gushing about her in this one, but she's really great with this material, and I love seeing her being able to do all the different things she's great at here, whether it be action or comedy or romance or whatever, and the way that she can just make anything work. And she has quite a bit to work with here, despite the kind of movie that is. You wouldn't think that about the characters in a movie like this, but they really threw a lot into her character, and she really still, even with her character having a lot to do and a lot of facets to her, you can still tell it's probably significantly more on screen than it probably was on paper because of just what she brings in general. So, yeah. And obviously, like all of her movies, I will probably see this again, probably next weekend. So, but even if it sucked, that probably would have happened anyway, just because that's how fandom works. So, it is kind of sad, since it's kind of up in the air of what exactly the next thing will be. But if I had to guess, I would say it might be that Western miniseries, The English. I think it's supposed to be like 6 episodes. A Quiet Place 3 just got a release date for like 2 years from now. But, yeah, I guess it's closer to a year and a half. But I think it's like March 2023. And then I haven't heard anything else about the whole ball and chain thing her and The Rock were supposed to be doing, so I'm assuming, I mean, with how well this will probably do, at least based on the crowd that I saw tonight, I would say anything with the two of them is probably going to get pushed forward. So I guess we'll see what happens with that, and whatever else happens. So I feel like it's been forever since we got news that she signed on to something, but yeah, well, I'm sure that'll come along eventually. But especially now this stuff is out. So it feels like she's been just doing constant interviews for like 3 straight months, with this and A Quiet Place coming out so close together. Like, I'm not even sure. She was filming The English in like January, I think is when it started. So I don't know what the progress on that is. I wouldn't think you'd finish a miniseries that soon. So there might be like a long break for her to do this press. I have no idea. I'm just speculating. But yeah, so and apparently, going back to what I said at the end of the Wild Mountain Time video, apparently I might be getting my wish that she won't get sucked into, like the Marvel, tornado. Because like I said, much as I love the Marvel movies, it's great to see how she's able to do all this kind of different stuff that she wants to do, and she's said many times before that that's kind of her goal, is to do as many different things as possible. And you know how Marvel movies work, so if the fact that she doesn't appear to have even been offered Fantastic Four, to me, is a good start. So it's like there's so many other doors you can go through, and then that news that broke today about Scarlett Johansson having troubles with Disney and her payment over Black Widow, it just doesn't look like a good endeavor for her to go down, especially if she wants to really explore her creativity. So, all the power to her for going in as many different directions as she can. So, yeah, and with her not getting completely caught up in like Marvel contracts means we get more of her, and she has the leeway to do more things. So, that's good news to me, I would think. But I get her fan base might feel differently because they really, really, really wanted that Fantastic Four thing. But I don't know. I'm perfectly and totally content if she does other things that require her talents much more. So yeah. So I'm gonna do a Nicolas Cage video. I'm assuming this will go out first, but that Cage video should be right behind this, and then we'll go into August. So until whatever the next thing is, I think that's it.